I'm Mark Zbikowski. I joined Microsoft in January of 1981 and lasted until June of 2006. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I believe I was born in delivered at Receiving Hospital in 1956. Son of a doctor and a medical stenographer, and grew up in one of the suburbs, Northville, and where I grew up there until I was 6 years old, and then we moved to Bloomfield Township. Fortunate enough to attend a place called Roper City and Country School. It was a private school in Detroit. Afforded me the opportunity to learn at whatever rate I wanted to, which in the math and sciences was at whatever speed I could possibly read. Ended up doing very well in math. Took part in several math competitions in Michigan and came in second place a couple of times and ended up meeting this fellow, Steve Ballmer, there. We became very good friends, and I can remember him coming over to my house, and we would spend, a weekend during the daytime. As 8th or 9th graders, we'd be playing basketball on the driveway. We had a pool in the backyard. We'd be swimming, we'd be biking, just talking about everything. He was always very, very physically active. He could not sit still. He was always moving, always asking questions, always very funny, always a gentleman. After 8th grade, I think 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, he finished in the top 100 every year, in top 100 in Michigan every year. And then he went to Harvard and got a degree in applied mathematics. People keep asking, what was his business degree in? It's like, he didn't have one. He was applied math. The summer math camp, they were teaching us, me as an 8th grader, they were teaching us group theory and number theory, which are college level things. And for me, it was just like, wow, all of a sudden I can see, bigger patterns in math. That's not just, simple algebra, but now let's take algebra and generalize it. Let's take, and so this idea of generalization, which actually goes into software, that now I've got this, I can see the world and I can see big patterns and bigger patterns and bigger patterns. Okay. And now that helps me understand all the little pieces, because now I can take from a larger pattern, another piece of learning from something else and then apply it here. And it's like, wow, that works. Math also gives you a bunch of tools for how to go and analyze problems. And it's just like discovery. My good friend Steve Ballmer even though he was 3 days younger than I am, he was a year ahead of me in school. And I describe it as that we went to different schools. I describe it as we went to rival high schools together. He went off to college, and just before my senior year of high school, I get a phone call from him. It's, "Hey, Zibby, this is Steve Ballmer. Remember me?" It's like, "Steve, it's hard to forget you." And he said, "I've got this. I'm at Harvard now, and I think that you might be an interesting person to talk to the local Harvard rep. I've talked with him, and he thinks he'd like to talk to you." I said, "Sure, Steve, why not?" Ended up going to graduate school, leaving graduate school, ended up working in Boston. And October of 1980, my phone rings. I pick it up. "Hey, Zibby, this is Steve Ballmer. Remember me?" I said, "Steve, it's hard to forget you." He says, "You remember Bill Gates?" I said, "Yeah, I remember him. I met him a couple of times." He says, "Well, we got this company in Seattle called Microsoft. We'd like to talk to you about, coming out here and seeing if you'd like to work here." I said, "Yeah, Steve." And this is literally the conversation. "Steve, this is my first job after graduate school. I'd like to settle down for a little while and not really, job hop. And I'm living in Beacon Hill, Boston, on the poor side. And I'm within crawling distance of the best bars in Boston, which I really was." And he says, "I understand." He says, "If you ever want a free trip to Seattle, just give me a call." I said, "Thanks, Steve." Hung up the phone. He said, "Steve was right about Harvard being the right spot for me." Picked up the phone and said, "Steve, fly me out." And flew out in October over the Halloween weekend, which is when Bill's birthday was, and went to a quote surprise birthday party at Bill's house. So it's kind of hard to pull that off. And got interviewed over the weekend several times by Bill and Paul Allen and a guy, Mike Orr, and Greg Witten, and they were just tag teaming me. And on Monday, when I flew back, there was a letter showing up that was a job offer, and I quit my job at Digital Equipment and went to work for Microsoft. What was the ONB, Old National Bank building at the corner of 108th and Northeast 8th in Bellevue. At the time, it was the second tallest building in Bellevue, and I think it is possibly the second shortest now. We were on the 8th floor. We had half of the 8th floor. You'd walk in, we had this, all the offices faced to the east, so you could see the Cascades. Bill had this great corner office where you could see Rainier. Paul had the office next to him, a double-sized office with another phenomenal view. I had the office almost in back of the receptionist, so when people would come in, I could, they'd always be there. Everybody had their own office. It was, all the doors were always open. Nobody ever shut the doors to the office. There was a little kitchenette down the hall that had, free soda. And then that was it. And I remember going there the first day, and they said, Mark, we hired you to rewrite our basic interpreter in C, but we have this other need for you to do some work on this thing we're doing with IBM about, an operating system for, personal computer that IBM's working on. I said, sure. And it turns out that sort of an inside joke was that whatever you were offered as a position in your offer letter, okay, you never did. Nobody ever did what they were hired to do. They were always, sidetracked to do something else. I thought the personal computers were cool because they could allow you to have all this power, on your desktop and not be interfered with by other users. They were big boxes that were not the most reliable. They were 8-bit processors with not a lot of memory. People today talk about their laptops having 16 gigabytes of memory, and so divide that by 1 million and take us down to 16 kilobytes of memory, and that was a standard size of the computers. People were storing data on cassettes, the Walkman type of cassettes. People were storing data on there, or paper tape was gone by that point, but people were storing data on these or on, floppy disks, 8-inch floppy disks, which stored a megabyte. Okay, which was, if you think about that, a megabyte is about 1/15 of a song today. By the time I came, Microsoft had already acquired the rights to what was 86 DOS. So Tim Patterson was still at Seattle Computer Products. He didn't want to really work for Microsoft at that time. A fellow, Bob O'Rear, was doing the adaptation. Bob wrote some of the control software for the Apollo landings. So interesting guy. They needed a linker that, which takes pieces of code that were compiled and puts them together into one executable file. They needed that, so they had acquired the rights to one, and my job was to actually move it from its operating system over to the new DOS, and through an amazing set of Rube Goldberg machines, it was or Mousetrap, where balls roll down and things jump. Once we had actually gotten the contract and we're building this, and it was released, I think, in August of '81, the original PC. At that point, I believe that Bill was, had already realized that hey, here's a great thing that we've got. Okay, there are a lot of other challenges that I had during that time, which for me were formative in terms of dealing with IBM and trying to understand from a customer provider relationship, how one does things. At first I was like, IBM says, do this. I say, okay, I'm just going to do it. And I'd be halfway through it and say, like, this is stupid. This is not going to do what they want. And that taught me that early on, that when a customer says, I need you to do X, doing X is the wrong thing 90% of the time. You want to go back to the customer and say, no, let's talk about the problem you're trying to solve. Let's, step up a level. Okay. I know you want to hold the shift key down and type this and have something happen, but no, what problem are you trying to solve? And then go after that problem, because you can probably solve the problem in a slightly different way, perhaps better, perhaps not, but at least you as a developer have an understanding for what the customer's problem is. And out of that experience, DOS 2 came out. And so DOS 2 had installable device drivers. It had the hierarchical file system. It had a programming model that very much mimicked the Unix programming model. I mean, without memory management and a bunch of other things and protection. But the file system access was very much, along the lines of Unix, moving applications from Unix to DOS much easier. Anyway, but this was, again, trying to solve their problems. They wanted initially to have, IBM asked, we need you to support a large hard disk, much bigger than the floppies. Okay, it was 10 megabyte hard disk, okay, which was about 2/3 of a song. There's a core group of us with Bob O'Rear and Kathleen Graham and Mike Courtney and Mike Orr. And there's a group of us that we would get together. We would work our 14 hours a day at Microsoft. Okay, we would individually go out and get burgers or whatever our meal was. We'd show up at a local pub called a Nowhere. Okay, and yes, it really was called a Nowhere. And we would play pool and foosball until they would kick us out. And we would repeat that the next day. We would go on Saturdays. We'd show up at Bob O'Rear's condo and we would play volleyball. This fellow, Mark McDonald, who was, I think, employee number 1 after Bill and Paul, he made the most amazing daiquiris. And we would play volleyball all day long, get sunburned, have burgers, get ridiculously drunk. And on Saturday, try to recover on Sunday. And then Monday, show up and start working our 14 hours again. It was fabulous. There were a bunch of really fun people. Almost all of them were single. Very few married people. But was, like I said, we worked hard and played hard. It was just a lot of fun. I remember when the company first incorporated, it went from a partnership to a real corporation. They handed out options, and I had to go read up on an option. And I looked at this, and I said, look at the value about this. I said, wow, at some point I can become, a thousandaire. It's like, who knew what was going to happen? At the time, I had no clue. I don't think anybody had clues. We were just interested in just building cool stuff that solved people's problems. At the end of DOS 3.1, I told Steve Ballmer that I was done working with IBM and I really wanted to do something different. He says, well, great, we're working on this multitasking version of DOS. You've been working with Gordon Letwin on that, and let's move you over to focus on that. And I said, great. Instantly, that turned into OS2, where we were working with IBM again. There were like 4 of us in Microsoft: Gordon, Anthony Short, Ray Pedrozetti, and myself. That we were the big architects to design how this thing would work. We had interminable meetings with IBM, with the IBM design team, and then. So we did that, started building the teams. I was in charge of file systems and device drivers, did that for a few years. Was also very much involved in the product planning and the content. After OS2 1.2 shipped, I wrote a list of all the issues that I thought were, big problems. And it turned out to be that was basically the bullet plan for OS2 1.3. This little list of things. So that's how. But at that point, I said, I'm done dealing with IBM. I was working for Paul Maritz at the time, and I ended up being his technical assistant for a couple of years. Worked on TrueType and printing models and other stuff for him. A fellow, Jim Alchin, came on. We brought him in from Banyan, and he was going to take over the system software group from Paul Maritz, who was off going to do something different. And he charted me with building a new file system to handle an object-oriented world. And we started working on what was known internally as Cairo, for no particular reason other than just it was a name that started with the C. It was a collection of object-oriented technologies and things that were, just fresh out of academia. So a directory service, which actually had been around for a long time, but Kerberos security, a file system that was very, very efficient for object storage, and then what was integrated content indexing and database functionalities in the operating system or file system. And so those pieces, and then a distributed file system along there too. So those are the five things. And at the same time, Windows NT was going along. So we were targeting both 16-bit Windows and Windows NT for this Cairo project. And it became very clear very early on that the 16-bit Windows was not going to be capable. So we worked targeting a lot of pieces of Windows NT. Unfortunately, Windows NT, great guys working very focused to deliver their engineering thing, and we needed changes, and we couldn't get stuff. And plus, we were also off in our own world. We made many procedural and technical mistakes. I ended up building a team and then shooting the team, killing Cairo altogether, the file system piece of it, and then moved over to work on Windows. Amusingly enough, in Windows 2000, all the pieces of Cairo shipped as parts of it. For me, it's always been about solving a customer problem. Working in an operating system is how to deliver cool functionality to the end user while still leaving as many instruction cycles left over, MIPS, okay, so that the application can do stuff. Building teams, communication with people, and dealing with people as a person is really important. Over the time, I probably had maybe 200 different people working for me over the course of my career. The thing I realized when I retired is that after 26 years at Microsoft, okay, having all these people work for me, I never fired anybody. People knew where they stood. If they weren't performing, they knew that they had to go make a choice. And they would either leave the company or leave whatever, but I never said, yep, you're gone. Very early on, as in like the first year I was there, Bill made it known that he views giving back to the community as an essential thing for everyone to consider. Okay, and he would do whatever it took to help people give back. Okay, even this is back when the company was 100 people. They did have charitable giving matches. We had every year at the company meeting, even when it was 50, 60, 100 people. There was always a section about the United Way, always something there. And yes, his mother was involved with that, but it was still something that was very important to Bill. Okay, it is a hugely unrecognized thing how much money Microsoft is given. The average public says, yeah, Microsoft does this giving thing, but people don't realize how much money was given. At one point, there was I remember reading that Microsoft had given, employees and Microsoft had given $100 million, to charity. Okay. That number has been dwarfed, in the years since. That's a ridiculous amount of money. That's a ridiculous amount of good. Microsoft gives, they had the loaned executive program for a long time. This type of stuff has always been, it's just been unrecognized. Okay, so that's one level, and that comes from from Microsoft matching, but it also comes, the direction comes from the heart of the people here, okay? And that is the real key. So, if the company goes and donates money, that's one thing, but it's directed by the employees, which really has, the big impact. Right after DOS 2 came out. I was sent to Japan on a business trip. And so I went to the Akabara, okay, which is the computer center. And I walked in, walking down the street and seeing, first of all, giant signs, okay, Microsoft. And at the time, Microsoft was only like 1,000 people. And seeing big signs for Microsoft and walking into a store, and there's just Microsoft software on the walls and big advertisements for Microsoft in the 90s, going into a hotel and, looking over the person checking me in and, oh, guess what? They're running Windows. It's like, wow, this is really everywhere. I felt fabulous. Fabulous. And it's like, hey, I had a part of I personally had a part of building that, and that was great. So when it was when I passed 10 years at Microsoft, the Micronews did an article on me, and they said, like, why, 10 years here, many other people, have just up and left. You could probably leave if you wanted. For me, there's some big reasons. One, I get to work with really great people and really smart people every day. Okay. That's cannot beat that. Okay. The work that I'm doing is interesting as all get out. It's consuming and makes me ignore the bad weather. It's really good stuff. Whatever I build, millions of people will use, and I will impact millions of people. That is a big benefit. Okay. Yeah, they pay me. And the last thing is my kids need to see me going to a job that I love every day. So why would I leave? Given all this, why would I leave? When I worked in DOS, working on the original linker, we needed a way to be able to identify a file as an executable file versus a memory image versus something else. And people were using, the last three letters of the file name, the extension, to go and distinguish it. And that's kind of crazy because it's actually the contents that matter, not the name. It's the it's like my mother says, it's not how someone looks, it's what's inside that counts. So yeah, and so the software that I was porting over, there was a field for identification. I said, why not? I said, right now it's got one set of initials in there, but I need to distinguish what we're doing from what they're doing because there's some differences. So stick my initials in there, MZ, as the first 2 bytes of every Windows executable. Every DOS executable was turned into every Windows executable. And if you take those initials out, Windows refuses to run it. After I left Microsoft, I went and I taught at University of Washington for 10 years. I taught operating systems. And in one of my lectures, one of the recent lectures, even though I stopped teaching 2 years ago, I brought up the fact that in my career at Microsoft, I probably wrote 1 million lines of code. And the students were like, wow. And I said, actually, it's not that big a thing. Okay, 1 million lines of code divided by 25 years, okay, is, that's 40,000 lines of code, okay? Divide that by 200 working days, okay, that's not a lot. I'm a slacker. If you can write 200 lines of code a day, hey, that's a great day. Microsoft still has it. Tons of really bright people with tons of really good ideas, okay? That, some are absolute winners, some are not, but they're all every idea is good. If you think it's a good idea worth listening to. Whatever Microsoft does now, no matter what, if it hiccups, it'll change the world.